It's time for the Bible. We don't really know for sure what is and what is not. Holy Ghost, God, baby, God blasted my spine. Ghost, friends, it's time for the Bible.
Time for that darn Bible Geek again, and I'm the darned one in question, Robert M. Price. Just wanted to report on a really terrific trip I had to Vancouver for the Imagine No Religion conference, the fifth one. I imposed on the audience with a stifling recitation called Imagine No Jesus, From Myths to Jesus, From Jesus to Myths. Actually went over pretty well. And there were lots of other ones, some of them not really my thing, but what the heck. I thought the speakers were all really top-notch. I was really delighted. Well, I saw my old pal and co-author of Evolving Out of Eden, Ed Suominen, got to talk with him and his wife a good bit, not enough, but he should have been a speaker there. And I got to meet personally for the first time people I had known online, like the great Aaron Ra, and to whom I gave an action figure of him that I had made, and Matt Dillahunty, then Seth Andrews, and all great guys, really terrific. I got to meet Richard Dawkins. Well, actually, I'd met him once before, some years ago, just to say hi, because we were both at an autograph table together. But I got to talk to him a bit. That was loads of fun. And there were various other ones. Pete Boghossian, great talk about a proposed method for trying to deprogram ISIS nuts and so on. And I had never met him or even seen him. I just knew of his work. What a great guy and what a character. And there are various other people there that I got to meet and talk with, Jerry Coyne and so forth. Just amazingly fascinating. I had to cringe at some of the leftism. As you know, I don't belong on that end of the spectrum. I remember early on in one of the lectures, somebody said that they had kind of, in Canada and Western Canada, they had disregarded certain strictures of the federal government there and had established their own Soviet Socialist Republic of Vancouver, and I was surprised. Of course, he was sort of kidding, but I was surprised at the big amount of applause that got. You know, on to the USS, back in the USSR. Strange, and I always chafe when people start saying that circumcision is awful. Please don't try to engage me on a debate about this. I'm just not that interested in getting into any of these debates, but I just there are people that want this stopped legally because it's child abuse, etc. My reaction is leave the Jews alone. I don't think you see the big picture. But even though, again, there were these cracks at political conservatives and so on, as if no one present could be one, I don't want to do the old, I took offense at it. I just did feel like a stranger in a strange land, though. And yet it was totally different talking to these people as people, whether the other speakers or the attendees. And that is always just a great, great experience. I can't get enough of it. Both their questions when I'm on stage and then just, having dinner with them, hanging around, talking to people. They're all great. Doesn't really matter what they think. In fact, I find the same thing to be true when I'm engaged in debates or something, and the fundamentalist folks come up to me. They're always unstintingly nice and friendly. Or when I'm talking to Lovecraft people. People are people, and I love them. That's just so great. And I really had the feeling that I was sort of being welcomed into the circle of the various atheist speakers and so on. It was really a great thing. I'm sure I'm leaving out stuff and great people I met, but I guess I got stage fright. Anyhow, I may be writing up an account of that sometime soon. I want to just once again plug a book in which I'm mentioned, though, and I'm pretty darn sure positively, but I can't read it because it's in Italian. It's by Franco Tomasi, Tomasi. Non c'è Cristo c'è tenga. I'm butchering that, I'm sure. And it means something like, even if Christ were here to change things, they would not change. Literally, Franco tells me, it means there is no Christ that will stand. There is no Christ that will hold his position. Interesting. And it deals with the whole Christ myth thing. Fascinating. So if you're a reader of Italian and would like to take a look at this coverage of this fascinating topic, I recommend this book. I got to check it out. Stephen says, I was wondering if you could recommend to me a few books on Hellenistic culture and influence in Judea or Palestine. I know there's a popular belief that the Jews were entirely immune to Hellenism. I was wondering if that was true. No, that's not only not true, it's ridiculous. You might try Martin Hengel, Hengel. He's actually fairly conservative and yet, a great critical scholar nonetheless, and he has a foundational book on this, out probably 30 or more years ago, called Judaism and Hellenism, 2 volumes in one in paperback, I think. And there's one edited by Thomas L. Thompson and somebody else whose name escapes me, called Hellenism in the Bible. I think that's correct, but you can find it, as I did, on Amazon under Thomas L. Thompson. I would suggest that because there is a good bit of Hellenism, and even in rabbinic Judaism. It's quite fascinating. In fact, there's also a book called A Hellenistic Commentary on the New Testament. I think Vernon K. Robbins, with 2 B's, is one of the editors on that, and it just has astonishing parallels. Or take a look at Burton L. Mack's book, The Lost Gospel, the Book of Q and Christian Origins, or any of John Dominic Crossan's books on the historical Jesus. They go into the availability of cynicism, Greek philosophy, to Jesus and so forth. Very fascinating. I'm sure you'll see a lot of interesting, eye-opening stuff. Hey, Andrew Lawson saith, 2 passages have always been a stumbling block for me. I'm in need of your divine guidance. In Matthew 3:9, John the Baptist is lambasting, is it lambasting or lambasting? I don't know. Those poor old Pharisees and Sadducees again, but I really don't understand his meaning. Do not presume to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father, for I tell you, God is even able from these stones to raise up children to Abraham. What the heck is that about? Well, for one thing, Luke doesn't have John say this to the Pharisees and Sadducees. He's just saying it to the crowds. And Matthew really hates the Pharisees and Sadducees, and he adds loads of material condemning them. So he changes the addressees there, but the rest of it's pretty much the same. I think the idea is that which is dealt with at greater length in the Gospel of John, where it says Jesus sort of implicitly accuses his critics of being Gentiles or bastards or whatever, and they say, oh, we have Abraham as our father. Yeah, I do the works of my father, you do the works of yours. And he says that you're really sons of the devil and so on. He said, if you were really Abraham's children, you'd welcome me, and so on and so on. But basically it's the idea that you find in Romans 3, that you think you've got it made. Hey, I'm in good with God. I don't have to worry. I've got a proud Jewish heritage and pedigree, if you will. And you think that's enough, that God cares about that? If that's all he wanted, he could zap these stones by the river and change them into more biological descendants of Abraham. No, you got to repent. As it says in Romans, one is not a Jew who is one only outwardly. Even the Gentiles may keep the Torah better than you, and they never even heard of it. They're doing it because they have a law within, etc. So this needn't be a Christian reference. Indeed, I don't really think it is. It's just saying that here is a revival preacher saying what all revival preachers do, right? In revivals, they're talking not to the unsaved, but to the saved. They're saying, don't think you got it made in the shade. Have you really taken Christ seriously? And that's the idea, or Kierkegaard rebuking Christendom. It's the same sort of a thing. You got to think again. The judgment is on the way, and just having your proper papers, your birth certificate, isn't going to do any good. You got to repent now. So I'm sure that is really what's going on there. By the way, there's a pun in there, in the Aramaic underlying it, or the Hebrew, I guess, technically. Don't say let's just take the last part of it. God is able from these stones, Ebeni, to raise up children or sons, Beni, to Abraham. That's why the comparison. It's a little pun. Okay, the second passage is Matthew 24:28. Jesus is on the Mount of Olives giving private teaching to the disciples. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Again, I'm not following. Well, I think that the most natural seeming meaning of this is found in Luke. I guess part of the... they're going to be living as if it's business as usual, but as the liturgy says, in the midst of life we are in death. Two will be grinding at the same mill. One will be taken, the other left. Two will be sleeping in the same bed. One taken, the other left. Hey, why'd you stop snoring? Yikes. And so on. Where, Lord? Taken where? Where do you think? Wherever the bodies are, that's where you'll find the vultures circling. They'll be taken away to be killed. That's what I think. Yeah. So, thanks, Andrew. This is from a former fellow Fundy. Try to say that one 3 times fast. You've said before that the Bible doesn't mention abortion, but what on earth is Numbers 5:11 through 31 about? Oh, well, 'tis a dreary business, that's true, but I guess I ought to read it, right? That's Numbers 5... Boy, it's annoying trying to turn these thin little Bible pages, right? Price, don't you prepare for this show? Not really. And the Lord said to Moses, say to the people of Israel, if any man's wife goes astray and acts unfaithfully against him, if a man lies with her carnally, and it is hidden from the eyes of her husband, and she is undetected, though she has defiled herself, and there's no witness against her, since she was not taken in the act, and if the spirit of jealousy comes upon him, and I like that phrase, he begins to put 2 and 2 together somehow, and he's jealous of his wife who has defiled herself, or if the spirit of jealousy comes upon him and he is jealous of his wife, though she has not defiled herself, then the man shall bring his wife to the priest and bring the offering required of her, 1/10 of an ephah of barley meal. He shall pour no oil upon it, and shall put no frankincense on it, for it is a cereal offering of jealousy, a cereal offering of remembrance, bringing iniquity to remembrance. And the priest shall bring her near and set her before the Lord. And the priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel, and take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, and put it into the water. And the priest shall set the woman before the Lord, and unbind her hair of the hair of the woman's head, and place in her hands the cereal offering of remembrance, which is the cereal offering of jealousy. And in his hand the priest shall have the water of bitterness that brings the curse. Then the priest shall make her take an oath, saying, If no man has lain with you, and if you have not turned aside to uncleanness while you were under your husband's authority, be free from this water of bitterness that brings the curse. But if you have gone astray, though you are under your husband's authority, and if you have defiled yourself, and some man other than your husband has lain with you, then let the priest make the woman take the oath of the curse, and say to the woman, The Lord make you an execration, an object of cursing, and an oath among your people, when the Lord makes your thigh fall away and your body swell. May this water that brings the curse pass into your bowels, and make your body swell and your thigh fall away. And the woman shall say, Amen, amen. Then the priest shall write these curses in a book, and wash them off into the water of bitterness. And he shall make the woman drink of the water of bitterness that brings the curse, and the water that brings the curse shall enter into her and cause bitter pain. And the priest shall take the cereal offering of jealousy out of the woman's hand, and shall wave the cereal offering before the Lord, and bring it to the altar. And the priest shall take a handful of the cereal offering as its memorial portion, and burn it upon the altar, and afterward shall make the woman drink the water. And when he has made her drink the water, then, if she has defiled herself, and has acted unfaithfully against her husband, the water that brings the curse shall enter into her, and cause bitter pain, and her body shall swell, and her thigh shall fall away, and the woman shall become an execration among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself, and is clean, then she shall be free, and shall conceive children. This is the law in cases of jealousy, when a wife, though under her husband's authority, goes astray and defiles herself, or when the spirit of jealousy comes upon a man, and he is jealous of his wife. Then he shall set the woman before the Lord, and the priest shall execute upon her all this law. The man shall be free from iniquity, but the woman shall bear her iniquity. Let's see, if she's a witch, she floats. This was a trial by ordeal. It seems to be saying that if she is an adulteress, this stuff will cause her to become barren. I think that's implied, but I don't see anything about terminating a pregnancy. It's not implied that she's become pregnant by some paramour. And I can imagine somebody reads that in and says that, that baby's not going to come to fruition, though they didn't do that with Bathsheba, all right? But I think it's just a primitive trial by ordeal. I don't think that's a reference to abortion either. Let's see. This is, I believe, from David Oliver. Yeah, David Oliver Smith. Famous author, or should I say notorious author, of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Paul. In the May 28th podcast, Dr. Barton wrote that he had come to a conclusion on the nature of the stones of fire mentioned in Ezekiel 28:13 through 15 and 1:13 through 14. He concluded that Ezekiel saw stars. Here's the description. In the midst of the living beings, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches darting back and forth among the living beings. The fire was bright, and the lightning was flashing from the fire, and the living beings ran to and fro like bolts of lightning. You know, Ezekiel, same as the hillbilly named Zeke. I think I may have a new voice for the next time it comes up. In my view, what Ezekiel saw were not stars, but plasma discontinuities, which are in the nature of a very powerful aurora borealis. Plasma is called the fourth state of matter in that it is an ionized gas and has electrical properties. At its discovery in the early 20th century, it was given the name plasma because of its lifelike properties. Glowing plasma seems to be alive, moving at its own volition in ways only a live creature could move. Around the world, there are almost identical petroglyphs, rock carvings of figures. Some appear to be human, but they curiously have two dots or circles on either side of their waists. There are also ladders, chains of arrows, wheels, and others. These figures are on rocks around the world on every habitable continent. It's difficult to date them, but some could be 15,000 to 20,000 years old. Plasma physicist Anthony Peratt, I guess you say, P-E-R-A-T-T, and mythologist Marinus Anthony van der Sloos, I think that's right, that's S-L-J-U-I-S, documented some of these figures and published an article about them in the University of Pennsylvania Museum Journal Expedition. You can find it online, but I can't read all the gibberish. Dr. Peratt started collecting these figures while working at the Los Alamos laboratories in New Mexico and seeing them carved in rock in New Mexico and Arizona. He recognized them as two-dimensional representations of plasma discontinuities that can be reproduced in the plasma lab. These are now called Peratt discontinuities. When formed by electricity running through a plasma, these objects appear to be alive and change form as the electric current creating them changes. In the article referenced above, the authors conclude that ancient artists were viewing plasma discontinuities in the sky and drawing what they saw. The authors ascribe the events to some powerful auroral-type discharge, presumably from the sun. Present-day auroras are caused by the electric current from the sun, called the solar wind, interacting with Earth's magnetic field at the poles. Glowing in the sky, these discontinuities would form, change shape, disappear, and reappear. The ancient observers would necessarily describe these as gods or God-created figures. In the article, the authors show a photograph of one of the laboratory-produced discontinuities and show how, drawn in two dimensions, it would look like a human stick figure. The dots at the waist come from the fact that the discontinuity has a glowing torus or donut encircling it. In two dimensions, it would look like dots on either side of the figure. Certainly Ezekiel was not written 15,000 years ago, but the prophet may have been repeating an oral tradition about glowing objects in the sky, or an event occurred only 3,000 years ago or so. I would go with repeating an oral tradition. The description above from Ezekiel 1:13 through 15 is fairly close to what a group of plasma discontinuities might look like in the sky. The stories would only be a minor part. The stones would only be a minor part of glowing plasmoids appearing, moving, and disappearing. One might think of ball lightning. That is a plasmoid. Lightning is plasma in an arc mode. Notice Ezekiel compares the objects to lightning. Nothing so mundane as stars would end up being recorded as some great event by a Jewish prophet. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 5, verses 167 to 8. Hamlet speaking to Horatio. Thanks, Dave. I'm working slowly on my introduction to the Bible called Holy Fable, the Bible Without Myth. Not up to the prophets yet, but boy, I don't know how I'm going to deal when I get to Ezekiel with the flying saucer theory, which I do not dismiss as ludicrous, though I don't know what to do with it. This should be fun. I'll have to remember this stuff for that, too. Let's see, the scrupulous atheist says, the Roman Catholic Church claims that Peter was the first pope. How true is this? Did Peter even exist? Is the Petrine doctrine an interpolation? The anachronism of church found in Matthew 16:18 seems awfully suspect. Is my intuition correct? What also seems problematic is that all the Gospels do not include this seemingly important tidbit. Are you aware of any manuscripts that leave this passage out? Matthew 16:18, and I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I do think this is an addition to Matthew, but not by a late enough date that we would have manuscripts that lack it. I personally am soundly convinced of the thesis of Arlo J. Now, I think you say, N-A-U, Arlo, like Arlo Guthrie, J. period Now, N-A-W, Peter in Matthew, with a longer subtitle. He shows, to my complete satisfaction, that there must have been at least two stages of expansion of Mark into what we call Matthew. There was an initial stage in which Mark's put down of Peter was pretty much erased or corrected. In that version, you would have read. Let's see. You would have had the get behind me Satan thing omitted, as I think Luke does, right? I'm not sure offhand. And there are various other slights against Peter that vanish. But because whoever this was in the Methian community was a fan of the 12, unlike Mark. But then somebody didn't like that treatment of Peter and went back through it and couldn't really cut anything out because it was too well known in his community. But he put later passages in to negate the effect, to pop the Petrine balloon and to bring him back down. And I could go on into that, but let me just say in this instance, this writer... Oh, I'm sorry. Well, he restored the get thee behind me Satan thing. But, I'm sorry, the first redactor, the pro-Peter one, would have been the one that added, you are Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, which of course means the gates of hell will not be able to withstand the attack by the kingdom of heaven, right? Okay, that must have been added to the Markan original, along with much else, to form the first stage of Matthew. So it was, and no doubt it is, an attempt to cement the importance of whoever the bishop of Antioch would be as Peter's successor. And Peter himself is dead. It wouldn't have been that important to say how great he was. The idea was succession, shake the hand that shook the hand. But it was Antioch, not Rome, that they were concerned with. But yeah, it's a Matthean interpolation. And what is? I'm doing a project, another one, where I'm trying to present the text of pre-interpolated New Testament books according to various scholars' theories, and I want to do the first stage Matthew in that one. But I don't think there are any manuscripts that survive that lack that. There are some that don't have the 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth thing, interestingly, but yeah, the church thing is a sign of it being pretty late stuff. Yeah. Okay, my next questions deal with Pascal's wager. I've always found it to be a form of emotional blackmail. How or why do you reject Pascal? Oh, by the way, did Peter even think that's a toss-up. There could have been somebody. Well, I always like the analogy of the ascended masters in Madame Blavatsky's mythology. She said there were these undying adepts in Tibet somewhere who had lived for thousands of years. They were enlightened and they, I guess, controlled the world, and they had sent her revelations. And she was a hoaxer. I'm sure she was also a sincere guru. I mean, it's a weird thing with these people, like Joseph Smith, too. Are they con men or real prophets? Kind of both. Very complicated. But nonetheless, these people, these ascended masters, had names like Kuthumi and Moria El and various other ones. And for a long time, non-theosophists figured she just made this stuff up. But it turns out she didn't exactly. These people are all based on people she knew. And one scholar went through the whole thing and through various letters and so on and could identify every one of the ascended masters as some contemporary, some friend or colleague of Madame Blavatsky. She had mythologized them into these gurus at the end of the world. And so I kind of think that is what's happened, that some of the New Testament people really are people, but they're wearing literary masks. So was there the Simon Peter we read about in the Gospels? Who knows? I think it may be a fictionalized version of some early church leader. But basically, the Peter tradition is fiction, no matter what the roots are, because, as I've said ad nauseum, Peter functions simply as Dr. Watson in a Sherlock Holmes story. Speaking of Sherlock Holmes, it brings to mind Hammer Films, and I just want to say how sorry I am at the passing of the great Christopher Lee, who played all kinds of great characters in Hammer movies in the 50s and 60s. And, of course, he was in the Star Wars prequels. He was in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. He was in The Wicker Man, and, oh, man, he was so great. Died at 93. There is a life well lived. Somebody that lived up to his potential and left such a great legacy of challenging and fascinating entertainment to nourish the imagination of generations. What a great guy. It's also Robert E. Howard Day, if you're one of the enthusiasts of Conan and his creator, as I am. I believe it's the day of his death, and a small coterie of pals of mine celebrate Howard Day every year. So much for Pete. There's an interesting book by Arthur Drobs, The Legend of Simon Peter, that Frank Zindler translated into English. You might check that out. He thinks he was purely a myth, partly based on Mithras. Fascinating. Back to Pascal's wager. Am I wrong in believing it to be contrived, or does the wager have any philosophical, theological force? I've always regarded the wager as merely an appeal to consequences of which there is no evidence for. Nonetheless, it has kept me up a few nights wondering what my eternal fate will be, even though I'm an atheist. I simply don't know if there is a God, but the God of Christianity seems very unlikely. 80 to 20 against, the 20 being Pascal's wager. You are indeed a scrupulous atheist. You are a true agnostic, I think, in Thomas Henry Huxley's categories, that you don't claim to know one way or the other, and it remains a live issue. Most atheists, I think, are agnostics in a different sense. They admit it's not inconceivable there's a God. They just don't think there's enough reason to take the possibility seriously. But you're Huxley's type agnostic. I think that it really does not work at all. It is, two huge problems. It's an oversimplification, a classic instance of the bifurcation fallacy. It gives you too few alternatives. And that really is fatal to it. I could be a Christian, and if there is no God, etc., then I've enjoyed a religious life if there's nothing after death? What the heck? I had a noble calling and a good life while I was here. No loss, not bad. If it is all true, I'm going to heaven, right? But if it's not, what the heck? It was a good life. If, however, it's true and you didn't believe in it, you're in a heap of trouble, boy. Right? And so how do you know? Well, okay, number one, you could say the same thing with Islam, with Buddhism, with the Jehovah's Witnesses, with any religion, right? I mean, you're scheduled for hell according to the Muslims. You're headed for annihilation according to the Jehovah's Witnesses. You're headed for reincarnation according to Hindus and Buddhists. I mean, you've had it either way, right? You can jump around from one sect to another trying to avoid the possibility that their damnation is genuine, but no matter which one you embrace, you're still scheduled for the inferno according to the others. Well, you might as well just forget it. Literally, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Now, how could you determine which is true? Well, there's no way. I mean, there's not even supposed to be a way, really, except by blind faith, and that means nothing. I mean, people have the same ill-founded confidence in any and all of these religions. Faith can't be much of a reason to believe anything if it's the same reason people believe in opinions diametrically opposed to yours, right? So forget that. But then the question is, even if you did just have Christianity and atheism as the choices, what can you do being afraid of the 20%? But pretend to believe in it. Try to believe in it. And I know the mind is a strange enough thing that you can persuade yourself you believe in it, but the fact that you have doubts shows you're not being honest. And you got to ask, what sort of a God would do this? Right? He's not giving you enough evidence to decide. What would be the virtue of making a blind leap? The virtue of taking a risk like that? Is that supposed to be what God seeks? I go with, what was it, Amos or Micah? It said, what does the Lord your God require of you but to do justly and to walk humbly before him? Surely it's not like a big casino. I mean, what kind of a God would make salvation available only on that basis? So I think you're right. I believe it's just, if it's true, it's describing a God and a religion that are unworthy by its own standards. Oh, let's see. John from New York City says, if Christians that believe that which is taught in Scripture, I can definitely understand coming to the conclusion that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are all divine members of the Godhead. This is very different from believing in a Trinity. After all, couldn't there be a quadrinity? What about 5 members of the Godhead, or 1,000,000? Hallelujah. Well, remember, Valentinus said there were about 365 of them. Okay, where in the Bible does it say there were 3 and only 3 members of the Godhead? Since that teaching is not taught in Scripture, isn't the doctrine of the Trinity something that shouldn't be considered orthodox? It would make more sense if it was called the doctrine of the plurality, which would consist of at least 3 members. When you consider the mind-blowing scale of this universe, you would have to assume that the God of the Bible has left many things a mystery. Maybe there's more to this Godhead, the Father, Son, Spirit, and second cousin, perhaps. I've never heard this idea before of you. Well, if I believe I've got this right, I invite correction. I think Mormon theology is basically polytheistic. It says we have to do with only 3 divine persons, but there are loads of gods, and you may one day become a god ruling your own world. As man is, God once was. As God is, man will one day be. Fascinating. Could be that only 3 are relevant to us. Francis Schaeffer used to say about the divine mysteries, mustn't there be so much more to them that we could never understand? Pick one. The attributes of God, hypostatic union of natures, the mystery of predestination, and so on. If you're really talking about something that's infinite and eternal, and you think you got it wrapped up, well, you got to be wrong. You've made it into an idol. You've whittled it down to your own pathetic dimensions, right? And he said, however, the thing is that what we are taught in Christian doctrine is true as far as it goes, and that's good enough for us. There are problems with that, but I kind of like that. H. Richard Niebuhr, in his terrific little book, The Meaning of Revelation, says something very similar. So does the old Buddhist parable of the blind men and the elephant. Right? These 6 blind guys are brought to an elephant in a zoo. They're all blind from birth. They've never seen one, but they've heard about this great beast, and they want to get an idea of what it's like. And they fan out around the beast, and one of them grabs the trunk and says, "What do you know? The elephant is like a snake." On the other end, the guy grabs the tail and says, No, the elephant is like a rope." Somebody up front grabs the ear. "No, you guys are crazy. The elephant is like a fan." Somebody else bumps into the broad side of it and said, "No, the elephant is like a wall." Another guy grabs one of the legs and says, "No, the elephant is like a tree." And the 6th guy grabs the tusk and says, "Oh no, the elephant is like a spear." And they're all bickering, and they're all right, but because they think they've got the whole truth, they're all wrong. Right? That's the lesson to be learned, and that does kind of make sense to me. If you found out that there were other members of the Trinity, would you have been at a loss for not knowing about them? Well, no. In a Christian framework, you just have to say, well, the ancients didn't know about the Trinity even. Maybe there is more that we don't know. So what? Apparently, we don't need to know it yet. So that's the way I would look at it, from the standpoint of looking at it from within the Christian framework. Let's see. Matthew says, what do you make of Peregrinus Proteus? His story seems to parallel the Simon Magus and Paul of Tarsus stories so well, it makes one wonder if there's a connection. How does Proteus fit into the Paul-Simon puzzle? This is a guy who was a cynic and then a Christian and then apparently a cynic again in the 2nd century, when Lucian of Samosata satirizes him. Very interesting. He wrote a tract called The Passing of Peregrinus, the Death of Peregrinus. And he said the guy gave up all of his money to the poor, as a cynic does, and went on the road, and eventually he became a Christian. And this is prime evidence for the theory that it was hard for people to tell the difference between Christian and cynic ascetics, which is why they go into things like, should Christian missionaries have a purse and a staff and a cloak, because those are the distinguishing marks of a cynic, and they didn't want to be confused with them anyway. Let's see. So he became a Christian and was very famous in Christian circles. He wrote works that are considered scripture by Christians, and was esteemed second in importance only to their founder, the crucified sophist. He says, he was arrested, and the widows and holy women would visit him in prison and bring him food and water. But eventually he did something to turn him off, and he did get out of prison and became a cynic again, and decided to go out with a bang. He announced that he would immolate himself, and he did. He set up a pyre. There were a lot of people, curiosity seekers, and he jumped into the flames, and some present said they saw an eagle rising from the flames. That was his spirit winging its way heavenward. It is striking that he sounds very much like the ascetic apostles and the apocryphal Acts of the apostles. Peter, Paul, Thomas, John, and so forth. These guys get imprisoned for preaching celibacy, and they have women converts, who visit them in prison and see to their needs. And but beyond that, he contributed writings that are considered scripture and is considered second only to Jesus by Christians. That does make you wonder if Paul is some kind of a fictive version of him or vice versa. Or could he be that some sort of another version of Simon Magus? It's very difficult to tell. There does seem to be some sort of connection. Some have thought that Peregrinus was the same as Ignatius of Antioch, and that because he was martyred and he supposedly wrote a bunch of letters that were widely revered. Don't know what to say about that, but it's well worth researching, and some folks have. Second, what do you make of the Ophites? I wonder if they were a late survival of the cult of Leviathan. Instead of seeing them as an aberration of Christianity, it would be more appropriate to see them as a separate monotheistic or henotheistic religious tradition evolving out of the old Canaanite pantheon. If Judaism and Christianity were both monotheistic religions that were built around Yahweh, perhaps Ophitism was a development around Leviathan. Ophos means serpent, right? They were also known as the Naasines because Nahas is serpent in Hebrew. So is Levi, and Nehushtan is the same as Leviathan. Maybe this is more evidence of the late survival of Canaanite paganism well after the Deuteronomic reforms. What do you make of this idea? Has anyone looked into this possibility before? And if so, where can I go to find more? I talk about this a little bit in Evolving Out of Eden, but for a long time I have thought this, that the Ophites / Naasines were some kind of survival among the worshippers, survival of the worship of Nehushtan and Leviathan. I'm not sure I've heard anybody else say that, though. I can't imagine it hasn't occurred to anybody but you and me, but we can just congratulate each other. I'm afraid I don't know where to look, but you might take a look at Evolving Out of Eden and my discussion there. Third, I know that scholars tend not to favor the idea of a connection between the Hyksos and the Hebrews, but the parallels are tantalizing. Is it possible if the story of the Exodus is a memory of the Hyksos being expelled from Egypt? Why don't scholars favor this idea? What do you think is the nature of the Exodus story, seeing as how it seems to be a myth in its entirety? Well, Niels Peter Lemke, Thomas L. Thompson, and all these people, I think, they produce evidence about what is known of the Hyksos. Apparently the dates are wrong. There's no real reason to believe the Hyksos were Semitic peoples, and they just dismiss the whole idea. And I certainly don't know anything about archaeology and linguistics compared to these gents, so I have to assume they're right about that. That does seem to be a false lead. The Exodus story, in some ways, seems to have been an expansion of the ancient royal mythology of Yahweh slaying Leviathan, a.k.a. Rahab, and the Song of the Sea in Exodus, 15, it seems to be originally a song about Yahweh defeating Yam, the personified sea. Same thing with Baal. There are many references in the Psalms and so on of God whelming the raging of the sea and such, and the dragon is just a personification of the sea. And Egypt was called Rahab, also the name of the chaos dragon. So I think it somehow evolved from that. In times of crisis, people would evoke God's victory over the sea or at the sea, and I think originally they meant the creation by combat, and the politicizing of it eventually led to the story of the Exodus, which simply cannot have happened, according to archaeology. And I discuss a bit more of this in my imminently forthcoming book, Moses and Minimalism. Lastly, you mentioned a while back that the characters of Noah and Moses may have started out as the same myth. I also seem to remember reading a theory somewhere that Moses and Enoch were rooted in a shared myth. You've mentioned that Enosh may also have been the first man in Israelite mythology, with Adam being an Edomite import. With the names Enoch and Enosh sounding so similar, maybe they too started as the same myth. Is it possible that there was some sort of Enosh, Enoch, Moses, Noah, Ur patriarch? Could be, but I have to admit I don't know enough of the origin of these names to like Enosh and Enoch. I've wondered this for years too, but it may be a kind of a false cognate. I really don't know, but it wouldn't be all that surprising if it were the case. I do think that the Israelites borrowed Adam / Edom from the Edomites, with whom they were neighbors, and hence believe they were blood cousins, which I guess they were, really ethnically related, and that the borrowed first man replaced Enosh, who had been the original first man. But of course the Israelites weren't monotheistic. They probably had various first man myths. According to the Encyclopedia Biblica article about Enoch, it's almost the same name as Noah. You know how sometimes the adjectival version of Noah, when you speak of the covenant of Noah, it's sometimes the Noachic covenant with a CH. So that's a hint of the same thing. The Sodom and Gomorrah story seems to be another version of the flood story. I'm not sure if I said that Noah and Moses were the same. Moses and Enoch have a myth in common, in that both were thought to have ascended into heaven without dying. So, how interesting. Jeez. Oh, well, I think I can probably finish the rain barrel for tonight. This is the scrupulous atheist here again. I wanted to ask you about the state of biblical scholarship. According to William Lane Craig, there is an increase in conservative scholarship. Is this true? How reliable is conservative scholarship? Is it all or mostly axe grinding? How trustworthy can one's scholarship be if the conclusion is assumed true at the outset? Yeah, it is true, as Craig says, that the field is more and more conservative. Partly that's because of a demographic shift in terms of what denominations have the money to send people to graduate school. And so at the SBL meeting, there's more and more and more conservatives, to the point where a lot of critical scholars want out of it. It was never supposed to be a religious meeting in that sense. Also, there's been, ever since Bultmann, a decline in the popularity, if you want to say, or the scholarly participation in truly critical scholarship, because it's never easy to separate it from one's institutional religious affiliation. It's not that people are lying about what they think, but you know the phrase, you can't think outside of the box. Well, often I think that is the case. Certain options just do not seem plausible because of your plausibility structure. Nobody thinks that. Well, then you're not going to think it. But I think that we've had a real decline from the great radical hypotheses of the 19th century. And my modest efforts over the years have been directed to keeping that tradition alive and carrying it further. That's why Darrell Dowdy and I came up with a Journal of Higher Criticism. That's why I am promoting the Dutch radical scholars and so forth. I think these guys made great advances, people just could not see because of where they were. And that's just my guess. I'm no mind reader. But yeah, that is true. But I think their scholarship is just boring. And it is a question of, you can't go too far. The boat is tied to the dock and they're not willing to untie it. classic case of this is Dallas Theological Seminary. You have to have 4 years of Greek and 4 years of Hebrew. And this, I think, is just for MDiv students. Why? What is the point? You know, these guys' theology might as well, you only need the King James Version of the Bible for any of that. You bring up any new possibility, you're out of there, right? Look at poor Mike Licona as an example of that. So it seems to me that all of it, like starting, well, a good example would be George Eldon Ladd at Fuller Seminary. He eventually became a little more neo-orthodox, but in all of his books, and I think also in the late R.T. France and I. Howard Marshall and a lot of these guys, they really were intrigued with part of the neo-evangelical thing in the 50s and 60s, and this continues today. They were really intrigued by the mainstream biblical scholarship, though they had to maintain a belief in infallibility and inerrancy of some kind, though they were willing to manipulate and redefine it. See my book, The Inerrant the Wind. But they knew they couldn't go too far, so they set up boundaries within which, let's say, form criticism might be helpful in determining what a particular pericope was supposed to be about. But, of course, no question but that Jesus did say it, right? So they found the tools helpful to some degree, but they tried to argue away the larger implications. So they were like what James Barr calls maximal conservatives. They really thought there was something worthwhile in it, but they didn't want to hand you the fruit of knowledge. And so there were careful breaks. I could see this with my brilliant teacher, David Scholler at Gordon Conwell. He had carefully defined boundary markers in his head for like how early Christianity began, the seemingly random spectacle of process of how the canon was formed, but he believed that the Holy Spirit guided it, and so he had it all kind of carefully marked out. Well, he was a great scholar, and nonetheless, I think Gordon Fee, another revered mentor of mine, I think he was kind of I don't want to say fudging it. He just had certain limits on what he could think. He did great work within them, though, no question about that. But a lot of this neo-evangelical approach to biblical criticism was trying to sanitize it for use by evangelical students or pastors or whatever. And as a result, there's virtually never anything new about it. They'd really sort of rather just stay in the pre-critical era, and that's why people like Craig are just masquerading as biblical scholars. They're N.T. Wright. They really want to keep things back as they were in the old days. Who knows, they may completely dominate it. Let's see, I wouldn't be surprised, but I won't live long enough to know what's going on there. Okay, our old pal, the Trickster, is back. And, let's see. Trickster here. Congratulations on emptying out the old rain barrel. Here's a contribution toward its refilling. I've recently read 2 books that you often mention on the Geek cast. I'd like to make a few comments about them. No questions as such, but I'd appreciate your comments. The first was Let the Reader Understand by Robert M. Fowler. What an amazing book. I have to admit that I used to consider Mark as possibly the least interesting of the Gospels, and possibly written by someone unrefined and perhaps without great learning. Robert Fowler has shown me that this is far from the case. I now see that Mark's Gospel is a master class in rhetoric, and is very carefully and intelligently constructed to make the reader work in order to understand the message of the Gospel. I never noticed before the many things that Mark doesn't tell the reader but forces him to make up his own mind about. while discreetly feeding them with a selective and possibly biased collection of stories which were to bring the reader's opinions into line with the author's own. We dinna see the full impact of the rhetoric of Mark these days because we inevitably read it through the lens of Matthew and Luke, who distort and often contradict Mark's original interest. Eye-opening stuff. I thoroughly recommend this book to all Bible geeks. It is really great. Now, there's some modern literary studies on the Gospels that strike me as just outrageous, that people are kind of rewriting it by rereading it, because otherwise I can't think of anything new to say about it. But I don't say that about Fowler. It's like, I felt like was one of these guys in Luke 24. Did not our hearts burn within us as he opened the scriptures to us? The trickster is right. You just get educated reading this book. It is astonishing how it solves one problem after another. It's just great. In fact, it'll seem obvious once you've done with it, though you probably never would have thought of the stuff. It's terrific. The other book I've read recently is Thomas L. Thompson's The Mythic Past. You commonly cite it as evidence for the fictional character of the Old Testament and the fabrication of parts of the Jewish religion. Sorry, but I didn't share your high regard for this book. Thompson does make a lot of staggering claims which, if true, would completely rewrite the history of the Bible, the Jewish people, and both the Jewish and Christian religions. The problem is that Thompson does not give the reader sufficient evidence to test or evaluate any of these massive claims. The book's pure assertion with no justification at all. It doesn't even cite any references, so the interested reader can't go anywhere else to check the data or to find out more. Very disappointing. Part of me wants to believe most of the stuff that Thompson claims, but the skeptical side of me simply cannot accept it. As Hitchens once said, that which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. If I'm to believe that the Assyrians had a, quote, policy, unquote, of moving peoples around within their empire and telling them that they were returning them to the land of their ancestors when in fact they were doing nothing of the sort, I need compelling evidence. None is given here. If I'm to believe that the Assyrians or Babylonians introduced or reintroduced long since dead or entirely fabricated religions to their resettled peoples, I need evidence for this. The supposed parallel between the returning exiles and the rebuilding of the temple by Ezra with Nabonidus and the rebuilding of the temple of Sin in Ur, Sin, the moon god, is not that compelling when viewed without Thompson's spin. A quick Google search was all that is needed to show just how far out of line with the actual data Thompson's interpretation actually is. Having said that, I do find 164 BC to be fairly I do find Thompson's case that the Bible chronology was modified and rewritten in around 164 BC to be fairly compelling. The book contains lots of fascinating stuff. It's just that most of it is inadequately evidenced, but it has made me want to read more of the minimalist literature. I think I'll try Niels Peter Lemke next. Which books of his do you recommend? Keep on geeking. Well, Trickster, I would suggest you read Thompson's Early History of the Israelite People from the written and archaeological sources. That is a much bigger and more technical book, but that's where he does get into all of this stuff. Thompson, Early History of the Israelite People from the written and archaeological sources. He also has a book on the patriarchs, showing how archaeology doesn't back that up, and he's got lots of other ones. Niels Peter Lemke's, the book of his I have read. I've read some other stuff by him, but is The Israelites in History and Tradition. Also, Philip R. Davies, his book In Search of Ancient Israel. That's a great one, too, that goes into a lot of this stuff. Ooh. Do I want to try to empty out the barrel? No, there's a bit more here than I figured. Okay, well, I guess that's it for the Bible Geek. By the way, I'm also posting a talk I did about the possible influence of the Buddhist Pundarika. it's late at night here. Sadharma Pundarika, the Lotus of the True Law, on Christian origins, and I hope that'll be up probably coincident with this. So I'll be seeing you soon on another exciting episode of the Bible Geek. Thanks for tuning in. Time for that darn Bible Geek again, and I'm the darned one in question, Robert M. Price. Just wanted to report on a really terrific trip I had to Vancouver for the Imagine No Religion conference, the fifth one. I imposed on the audience with a stifling recitation called Imagine No Jesus, From Myths to Jesus, From Jesus to Myths. Actually went over pretty well. And there were lots of other ones, some of them not really my thing, but what the heck. I thought the speakers were all really top-notch. And I was really delighted. Well, I saw my old pal and co-author of Evolving Out of Eden, Ed Suominen, got to talk with him and his wife a good bit, not enough, but he should have been a speaker there. And I got to meet personally for the first time people I had known online, like the great Aaron Ra, and to whom I gave an action figure of him that I had made, and Matt Dillahunty, then Seth Andrews, and all great guys, really terrific. I got to meet Richard Dawkins. Well, actually, I'd met him once before, some years ago, just to say hi, because we were both at an autograph table together. But I got to talk to him a bit. That was loads of fun. And there were various other ones. Pete Boghossian, great talk about a proposed method for trying to deprogram ISIS nuts and so on. And I had never met him or even seen him. I just knew of his work. What a great guy and what a character. And there are various other people there that I got to meet and talk with, Jerry Coyne and so forth. Just amazingly fascinating. I had to cringe at some of the leftism. As you know, I don't belong on that end of the spectrum. I remember early on in one of the lectures, somebody said that they had kind of, in Canada and Western Canada, they had disregarded certain strictures of the federal government there and had established their own Soviet Socialist Republic of Vancouver, and I was surprised. Of course, he was sort of kidding, but I was surprised at the big amount of applause that got. You know, on to the USS, back in the USSR. Strange, and I always chafe when people start saying that circumcision is awful. Please don't try to engage me on a debate about this. I'm just not that interested in getting into any of these debates, but I just there are people that want this stopped legally because it's child abuse, etc. My reaction is leave the Jews alone. I don't think you see the big picture. But even though, again, there were these cracks at political conservatives and so on, as if no one present could be one, I don't want to do the old, I took offense at it. I just did feel like a stranger in a strange land, though, and yet it was totally different talking to these people as people, whether the other speakers or the attendees, and that is always just a great, great experience. I can't get enough of it. Both their questions when I'm on stage and then just, having dinner with them, hanging around, talking to people. They're all great. Doesn't really matter what they think. In fact, I find the same thing to be true when I'm engaged in debates or something, and the fundamentalist folks come up to me. They're always unstintingly nice and friendly. Or when I'm talking to Lovecraft people, people are people and I love them. That's just so great. And I really had the feeling that I was sort of being welcomed into the circle of various atheist speakers and so on. It was really a great thing. I'm sure I'm leaving out stuff and great people I met, but I guess I got stage fright. Anyhow, I may be writing up an account of that sometime soon. I want to just once again plug a book in which I'm mentioned, though, and I am pretty darn sure positively, but I can't read it because it's in Italian. It's by Franco Tomasi, Tomasi. Non c'è Cristo c'è tenga. I'm butchering that, I'm sure. And it means something like, even if Christ were here to change things, they would not change. Literally, Franco tells me, it means there is no Christ that will stand. There is no Christ that will hold his position. Interesting. And it deals with the whole Christ myth thing. Fascinating. So if you're a reader of Italian and would like to take a look at this coverage of this fascinating topic, I recommend this book. I got to check it out. Stephen says, I was wondering if you could recommend to me a few books on Hellenistic culture and influence in Judea or Palestine. I know there's a popular belief that the Jews were entirely immune to Hellenism. I was wondering if that was true. No, that's not only not true, it's ridiculous. You might try Martin Hengel, Hengel. He's actually fairly conservative and yet, a great critical scholar nonetheless, and he has a foundational book on this, out probably 30 or more years ago, called Judaism and Hellenism, 2 volumes in one in paperback, I think. And there's one edited by Thomas L. Thompson and somebody else whose name escapes me, called Hellenism in the Bible. I think that's correct, but you can find it, as I did, on Amazon under Thomas L. Thompson. I would suggest that because there is a good bit of Hellenism, and even in rabbinic Judaism. It's quite fascinating. In fact, there's also a book called A Hellenistic Commentary on the New Testament. I think Vernon K. Robbins, with 2 B's, is one of the editors on that, and it just has astonishing parallels. Or take a look at Burton L. Mack's book, The Lost Gospel, the Book of Q and Christian Origins, or any of John Dominic Crossan's books on the historical Jesus. They go into the availability of cynicism, Greek philosophy, to Jesus and so forth. Very fascinating. I'm sure you'll see a lot of interesting, eye-opening stuff. Hey, Andrew Lawson saith, 2 passages have always been a stumbling block for me. I'm in need of your divine guidance. In Matthew 3:9, John the Baptist is lambasting, is it lambasting or lambasting? I don't know. Those poor old Pharisees and Sadducees again, but I really don't understand his meaning. Do not presume to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father, for I tell you, God is even able from these stones to raise up children to Abraham. What the heck is that about? Well, for one thing, Luke doesn't have John say this to the Pharisees and Sadducees. He's just saying it to the crowds. And Matthew really hates the Pharisees and Sadducees, and he adds loads of material condemning them. So he changes the addressees there, but the rest of it's pretty much the same. I think the idea is that which is dealt with at greater length in the Gospel of John, or it says Jesus sort of implicitly accuses his critics of being Gentiles or bastards or whatever, and they say, oh, we have Abraham as our father. Yeah, I do the works of my father, you do the works of yours. And he says that you're really sons of the devil and so on. He said, if you were really Abraham's children, you'd welcome me, and so on and so on. But basically it's the idea that that you find in Romans 3, that you think you've got it made. Hey, I'm in good with God. I don't have to worry. I've got a proud Jewish heritage and pedigree, if you will. And you think that's enough, that God cares about that? If that's all he wanted, he could zap these stones by the river and change them.